the massive underfunding of special educational needs, which is referred to as SEND, and other support for young people was addressed by Rachel Reeves in the budget last week with the announcement of an additional 1 billion in support. However, a recent piece from Open Democracy referenced local authority research that demonstrates why exactly this is nowhere near enough to be giving these kids the bare minimum of support. In this report from the County Councils Network, they predicted that deficits in SEND funding risk bankrupting almost three quarters of England's largest councils by 2027. The current deficit, to be aware, is sitting at 4 billion, and that is expected to grow to 5.7 billion next year. In the report, they also reference an explosion in the number of young people needing specialized support in schools, and they do again talk about the cost of this support. The thing that I want to kind of highlight here is this rhetoric of another broken system. It's not new, but it is scary when you're talking about the needs of disabled children and children who are neurodivergent or in other ways vulnerable, alongside these culture wars that we've seen recently around like overdiagnosis of neurodivergence, around the dehumanization of the disabled and vulnerable in our country, to nothing more than really being seen as a financial burden. Very easy out for politicians that only want to talk about innovation and transformation if it includes some sort of private contract. Now, Open Democracy's coverage referenced one example of just how brazen and widespread this ignorance is when it comes to school children. In this article, they mentioned that earlier in the year, in a meeting this year about the rising cost of council support, three Conservative councillors at Warwickshire County Council made extremely ableist comments about children identified as having special educational needs. The councillors dismissed the existence of neurodevelopmental impairments such as ADHD, literally just outright said that they didn't exist. They blamed social media use and parenting skill shortages. They suggested that affected children are just really badly behaved and need some form of strict correction. One even seemed to advocate for the exclusion or institutionalization of disabled and neurodivergent children, saying that we should return to historic ways of dealing with them. Zoe, one of the major points that was made by disability rights campaigners and groups around this budget wasn't just that the commitment of 1 billion wouldn't come even close to plugging the gap that needs to be filled for these children to get the bare minimum of SEND support in the first place, but also that a lot of these challenges could be solved by actually just creating a more inclusive education system overall. However, when we talk about transformative change with the government, I feel like I can hear the private contracts like waving in the background. What are your kind of thoughts when it comes, it feels like another case of we either have to spend loads of throw money at it and private contracts, or we just write it off as broken.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've really hit the nail on the head with that thing about like you can point to any fundamentally important part of our society right now, whether on a macro level of like the justice system or a smaller, more specific level like legal aid, like and say broken because it has been broken and it has been broken by underinvestment while, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but while the richest people in our society have grown immensely much more wealthy, because that wealth has been transferred from the public sector into private hands, and that money needs to be clawed back. Like we cannot accept this narrative that oh, there just isn't enough money for disabled and neurodivergent kids in this country to get the education and the support that they need. That is just, it's just a simple red line. It should never, like it should do for any government straight away if they are saying we're unable to provide for disabled kids. Full stop. Like there is no point in a state if the point of the state is not to protect disabled kids. And so, what we really, really, really need to do is start looking to the future, because I feel like that argument can only possibly be made by an administration that is thinking in terms of 5 years. And it is thinking of like, where will the budget be and how will I balance the book in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years, in 5 years. And nobody seems to be willing to have a conversation about where our country will be in 20 years when these people are grown into adults, and whether they have had the support that they needed when they were young or not will change everything for their life outcomes. And this is reflected across every part of our conversation about funding the state we need. We are being told that we need to shrink ourselves to fit things that do not fit us anymore. And we are being told, and in so many ways, that we can't afford it. And every new thing that you talk about, whether it's disabled kids, whether it's refugees, whether it's any of these things, it ends up being, oh no, we only have this much. Is it like, if we stop here and say we've only got this much, then the country is going to just like that's it. Like turn off the lights with the last one who ages out. Turn off the lights. Like we have to imagine and talk like we have a future for the country for decades and generations to come, and therefore we don't have enough. No, we need to build more because there will be a future. These kids will grow up. There will always be more disabled kids who need that support. And so it's not a question of saying, oh, well, we can't, because the country goes on for more than 5 years. These people's lives go on for more than 5 years.
I mean, yeah, I completely agree. It feels like it's I was we were speaking to a fantastic creator called Maya Barbie Advocates on TikTok the other day about this same kind of conversation happening in the NHS, and she was saying so much of our health system relies on, like, people's state of health overall doesn't just come from the hospitals that they're in. All of the life circumstances ahead of that. It also feels like when it comes to, like, creating more inclusive, accessible environments for young people, like, there are a lot of ways in which Zen is not fit for purpose because there is a larger volume of young people who are being diagnosed. There's also a lot more support that's being needed because we're giving people support who need it. Like, it's like the whole conversation of, like, women being overdiagnosed with ADHD now, where it's like, it's not overdiagnosis now, it's a failure to have diagnosed earlier on. And it's almost, to me, it may sound a little skeptical. I mean, I do often believe that, like, it's not an accident that they underfund certain areas, but it feels a little bit like the same kinds of discussions that we see about inclusion and accessibility in the workplace, where acknowledging that these things are real and that this support is actually needed would mean that businesses have to actually make those adjustments, and those adjustments would benefit everyone. Like, include we know when it comes to inclusive and accessible workforce and processes, they don't just benefit the people who directly need them, they benefit all of us because it's a better way of working for people. But they don't want to have to go through the hassle of making those adjustments. So instead, we'll just say, okay, well, it doesn't exist, or sectioning off the needs of specific staff, or sectioning off the needs of specific young people. And I feel like that's how we end up with this rhetoric again and again. The Tories say it openly, they just say it doesn't exist. Then the Labour Party don't say it openly, but say, oh, that's the best we can do. Just refusing to acknowledge those needs overall allows them to just continue to let things like Sen just like limp on.
But
And
that's so right. And your comparison, I think, to the workplace and like making adjustments so as to enable women to fully participate in the workplace is such a pertinent one because I have a brilliant friend. Her name's Anna, and she's a fantastic campaigner on disability rights. And she's a researcher at UCL on these issues. And one of the things she did was she traveled around the world to see different like disability. There's a bit. It sounds like a tangent, but I feel like it really addresses
with you,
this.
I'm following.
She traveled to India to a disability rights charity, and she went to their office. And the office is set up so it's a charity that helps wheelchair users, and the office is set up with ceilings that are essentially too low for somebody who's standing upright, and chairs and desks that are set at the level for wheelchair users. And so, if you are not a wheelchair user and you walk into that office, you have to awkwardly sort of squat your way in and feel out of place and not be able to perform to your best ability in that office and feel made less able, right? And the point of that is that it isn't people's disabilities that prevent them from being able to be fully part of our society. It is the way the society is designed for people with certain abilities that creates the barriers that prevent people from being able to do all the things that they want to be able to do, and to and not that people's value is based on contribution, but to be able to contribute and to be part of workplaces and so on in the same way. And I've had that argument with someone who just, said to me, like, why should women, surely if women are as equal to men, then we shouldn't have to make, special adaptations so that they can fit in the workplace. And it's like the workplace was designed for men, and that is why it's not because women aren't good enough. It's because you have made a workplace that does not fit us. And it is the same with like our schools and our society. Our society is made in a way that doesn't fit disabled people, but that doesn't actually mean that they are incapable of achieving any of the same things if we had a society that was built to recognize the simple reality that people are neurodivergent, that people have all sorts of different abilities and disabilities, and that we need to actually get the best out of that. And that does involve making changes, like quite fundamental changes in some ways, to how our society is set up.
Yeah. I know. I mean, I think the example that Maya gave was around like installing a wheelchair ramp in a school. Like very, very basic. Installing a wheelchair ramp doesn't just help someone who's in a wheelchair. It helps someone who's got a pram. It helps someone who is elderly, can't manage steps. It helps a lot of different people. Things like 4-day work weeks or flexible working. We know they benefit organizations overall, but it would allow for less control, and it would allow for essentially cracks in the plaster? I've forgotten the phrase for it. It would enable the cracks to show essentially in the existing system that we have, and once those floodgates open, to move on to an analogy that I'm more comfortable with, it would make it's far harder to stop. So it's almost like there's this, just refuse to acknowledge it for now, and then surely we can just wish it away, or we won't
Yeah,
see
well,
it.
exactly. It's this idea that if we do not provide services for kids with special needs, then like, that this will like what happens? Like that they just yeah, yeah, this will go away. No, of
That's on
course
them,
not.
and then as they get older, they'll age out of school, and then we'll blame them for being
Yeah,
economically inactive,
yeah,
and
we'll
then we'll
blame them
refer them to
for relying on the
DWP,
welfare state.
and that'll be a
Yeah, and
whole
then we'll
different
cut their
situation.
benefits and we'll send them round to the job centre more and more often, more times a week, because that will help.
It
Um, yeah, and it will all cost, your average taxpayer way more.
yeah,
But, like, it also is yeah, and it is across the whole of society. I mean, like, right now we have a situation where, like, yeah, it's local councils that will go bust because of this. And the reason is because our local councils have become, like, the social care system of our country. Like, the vast majority of your council tax goes to elderly or child social care. Did you like, that's insane.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.